lit. Some people pitch a fit when I start asking who wrote those marvelous plays. They tell me to shut my trap, that they don't want to flap, nothing to unwrap about no authorship mystery. Truly, though, a merchant in grain who wrote Knavery, as with Richard III, though Henry V is possibly worse. And in comedy, how about Dogberry and the Romeos and Juliet's nurse? Shakespeare is infinite, Shakespeare's illiterate. Something here doesn't fit the Stratford story. Someone illuminate me. As for tragedy, there's Mark Antony. Lear and Hamlet are absolute gold. Puck is magical, but most tragical is the rubbish we have been told. Something just won't cohere, Stratford's a myth, I fear. Who is this Earl de Vere that I've heard of? Someone illuminate me. In those plays, I want illumination.
Hey, I'm here, right? Thanks. Yay. All right. Romeo and Juliet, you know. Anyway, first of all, welcome all to the Shakespeare Illuminated show, where we want to shed light on each of Shakespeare's plays. I'm Michael Delahoyde, escapee from Poughkeepsie with a doctorate from the University of Michigan and a professor of English. And I'm a Shakespeareaholic. Our mission is to appreciate the brilliance of Shakespeare's plays, and when considering the playwright's choices and sometimes baffling passages, to speculate how can we understand his work further through consideration of the Shakespeare Authorship Question. That is, if we free ourselves from the strained and goofy notion that the works were written by the Stratfordian grain merchant Shakespeare, and instead by Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, using the pen name Shakespeare, such as the so-called Oxfordian perspective. Are the Shakespeare works better illuminated? Spoiler alert, yes. The Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship's website, shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org, all one word before the dot, can inform you much more about this perspective, as can my own site, michaeldelahoyde.org, my name before the dot, all one thing. You want to be careful about how you handle this Oxfordian information given in this series or on either of the websites. Know that the issue of the Shakespeare authorship is hotly contested and too typically meets with hostility, especially in schools and colleges, where with religious intensity, it's even labeled a heresy. We don't want anybody flunking English because of someone else being ill-informed and or intolerant. But want to be in possession of some suppressed knowledge? It's really cool. You can enter comments into chat, which I'll try to keep an eye on. And if you have more formal questions, you can hit that Q&A button down below. You should be seeing. If I don't address these during the hour or so, stick around for a Q&A immediately following. So we're going to explore now what can be considered Shakespeare's best-known play, Romeo and Juliet, where we're plunged into a street brawl right away between members and servants of two different families. We meet a lovesick Romeo mooning over a female who has no interest in him, his masked attendance with his friends at the enemy family's party, Romeo and Juliet's love sonnet at first sight, and the subsequent agonies and ecstasies. Just, we wish, not in that order. OMG, how can you not know the rest? Well, I'm not talking about it until we get there. It's pretty sad. So here are some general questions we want to try addressing. Why would Shakespeare select an obscure, prudish adolescent poem to transfer into an immortal love story for the theater? His source. Get to that in a moment. How do we explain the key names? Romeo versus Romeus in his source. Benvolio, Mercutio, characters who don't have names in previous versions of this story. Why did Shakespeare make Juliet so young? My students, freaked out about that. And why do we get an extraneous apothecary scene, usually omitted in performances, set in Mantua? Well, let's all go to Verona. Tristan and Isolde, Lancelot and Guinevere, Dido and Aeneas, Troilus and Cressida or Cressida, Pyramus and Thisbe. All these famous love pairs from the Middle Ages are all superseded by Romeo and Juliet. So you might have heard some of those, but probably because of Shakespeare too. He originally the names Montecchi and Capulet show up in Dante's Purgatorio, and I don't know what they're doing there because when I'm with students, we just stay in hell. But there are other Italian sources based on this rudimentary story. And the direct source, and most important, is called The Tragical History of Romeus and Juliet, published in 1562. And it's supposedly by an AR period, BR period, where the assumption is that this is Arthur Brooke, a young guy who drowned, and that's all that they're going on. It's an obscure piece, but it's disapproving of the love match. It's disapproving of lust, unhonest desire. You should take the advice of the authority figures and parents and all this. And it just seems to most people to be written by somebody who would have been a teenage boy going through that prudish phase. Anyway, it's obscure enough to be a bizarre source for this most glorious play, except we Oxfordians think that Oxford himself wrote that poem and used it for the play afterwards. Well, here it is then. The first word in some of Shakespeare's plays is not only thematic, but really powerful. And I'm not saying this one necessarily is as important as who in Hamlet, or when in Macbeth, or if in Twelfth Night. But the first word in this one is delivered by a prologue, a chorus, who says, two. There are two houses, two warring factions. And of course, obviously we've got this pair of lovers, but there's a lot of two play in all of this. And the chorus will say, spoiling the whole plot anyway, that the pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. Well, come on, Shakespeare. A pair takes their life. Sorry, I'm an English teacher. A pair takes their life. You got that wrong. You went from a singular to a plural. A pair of star-crossed lovers take their. Okay, that's plural. So the pair is their life. There's two of them. It's lives. You messed up. Oh, no, wait. You're brilliant. You're going back and forth, blurring the two and the one. Okay. Let's go. The theme of two shows up again at the very beginning, where you've got two servants on the streets with the very un-Italian names of Samson and Gregory, but they are waiting for a fight when two of the House of Montague come, because these warring factions are taking place. Now, the Oxfordian explanation for this is that when Oxford had his affair with a Juliet, we'll say more about that, the faction associated with her family did in fact ambush and attack repeatedly Oxford's men and Oxford himself. So more details about that are coming, but in a kind of a roundabout order, this is a bit of autobiography. The contentiousness is severe. They insult each other. And one of the Montagues associated with Romeo comes on the scene. His name is Benvolio. In the source, he's not named, but he's a friend of Romeo, and his name means Benvolio, goodwill. Or some Oxfordians say goodwill to EO, Benvolio. And this is why we get so many characters with the EO ending on their names, because Oxford used EO as his signature for early poems. And Romeus in the source becomes Romeo. And Shakespeare is doing this all over the place. The other interesting matter with this is that once Oxford becomes enamored of all things Italian, he realizes that EO, spelled IO, but pronounced EO, means I. That's my identity. And if Oxford is concerned about one thing, it's identity. And same with Shakespeare, because we think they are one. Anyway, Benvolio, goodwill, tries to stop the fight, and the prince of Verona comes on the scene and has had enough of this nonsense. Now, know that Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, liked to be called prince and play the gender ambiguity card, and she indeed had a fit at this constant brawling that was going on in the streets in the early 1580s between Oxford's men and Vavasor, his mistress's family people. Anyway, we're going to have a good talking to, says the prince to the heads of the two families. Next, Benvolio talks to the Montague parents about their son Romeo, and he's moping along and he's lovesick. And we saw him out at a sycamore grove outside the west side of town, outside the gate there. Richard Roe, the late Richard Roe, decided that he was going to check out all of these details that Shakespeare seems to know geographically, and said, there is a sycamore grove right outside there. This is not tourist information. This is not somebody who's a sailor coming back and telling you in a bar, hey, there's this great sycamore grove outside the west side. No, he witnessed it, and Oxford would have. But more recently, another Oxfordian has said that those aren't sycamores, actually. Rowe got it wrong. Those are plane trees, Plane. And I don't know. It's not impossible, it seems to me, that Oxford got it wrong because he recognized something that looks similar to sycamores. And then Rowe, really wanting to nail this, said, yeah, those are sycamore trees. But in any case, we can dismiss that and say that, well, it's handy to say Romeo is mooning under sycamore trees because maybe what Shakespeare heard was sick amour, lovesick. So, in any case, the Montagues are also fretting about Romeo being so antisocial. And they say, he, private in his chamber, pens himself, shuts up his windows, locks fair daylight out, and makes himself an artificial light. Well, you hear he pens himself in. He just imprisons himself in his room, moping. But pens himself? Is that he's writing about himself? Which we think this play and all of them are exactly what Shakespeare is doing, the Earl of Oxford. It seems like this is the standard Petrarchan pose of a lover, where you're supposed to be in agony and she's supposed to be standoffish. And what you hear about this Rosaline that he's mooning over is pretty troubling, maybe, because the associations are connected to Oxford getting nowhere with Queen Elizabeth eventually. So he is saying that she's like Diane, sworn to chastity. She'll not be hit with Cupid's arrow, just like the acknowledged tribute to Queen Elizabeth in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Diane is the moon goddess, the virgin goddess associated with the moon, which Elizabeth always is too. And she's insisting on chastity, and she wants nothing to do with connecting with guys. She is rich in beauty, only poor, that when she dies, with beauty dies her store. For beauty starved with her severity, cuts beauty off from all posterity. That's the message in Midsummer Night's Dream, but especially in those early sonnets too. You want to reproduce, create another beautiful version of yourself. And it's a persistent message in Shakespeare, but pretty much directed, it seems most appropriately, at Elizabeth. When these brawls in the street persist, we're connecting it to Sir Thomas Knyvet, Knyvet. And this is the relative of the woman Oxford had an affair with, who was one of Queen Elizabeth's ladies, Anne Vavasor. She was a teenager, and Oxford impregnated her, and somehow, because of fashion of the time, she got away with that, and nobody knew until the actual birth. She and I think the baby and Oxford were all chucked into the Tower for a while, and eventually, when Oxford got out, there were these brawls taking place, as I said, between Thomas Knyvet, who I like to call Knivet because it's so insulting and Monty Python-esque. But in any case, Thomas Knyvet was attacking Oxford. In the very first of these brawls, Oxford suffered a leg wound, and Shakespeare says that he is lame in the sonnets, and everybody thinks, okay, well, that's just poetic license. But also you have Cassio and Othello getting ambushed in the exact same way and getting a leg wound there too. So it does seem like this is relevant to our play currently. There's a young nobleman, Paris, who's asking for Juliet Capulet's hand in marriage. And at 13, you think, that's a bit young, but she'll be 14 soon. Now, what is this all about that's sickening my students? Juliet is not given an age, not that young anyway, in any of the sources. But it is true that Oxford's wife, Anne Cecil, was 14 when Lord Burleigh, Oxford's initial guardian and then eventual father-in-law, was pushing the match. So it seems to me that just like Polonius insisting in Hamlet that the whole reason Hamlet's insane is because of his daughter Ophelia. Oh, it's all about Ophelia. That sounds like it must be coming from Oxford's experience too. And in this case, if you make Juliet, who is really your illicit mistress, if you make her 14, maybe that'll soothe Lord Burleigh, and he'll say, oh, he must be talking about my daughter who's only 14. And you got a good cover for just now engaging in autobiographical intensity of really being obsessed with this dark lady, Anne Vavasor. Well, Benvolio says, you know, you should shop around, dude, because you are clearly getting nowhere with this Rosaline person. There's a mention from the Capulets where Juliet's mother says, it seems to be implying that she was, don't, you know, worry about being so young, so that she was as young when she had Juliet, meaning that Lady Capulet's only about 28 years old. Though later on, you get a contradiction to that. So maybe we've got some revision there, or who knows. But there's a reference in talking about Juliet's age where it was there a earthquake when she was born. And so Shakespeare scholars want to say, okay, when were there earthquakes? And you can pinpoint an earthquake, a mild one in England from 1580. So maybe we're dating this and it's 11 years after that. And so, no, 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 no. And then maybe there was another one. But there was a devastating earthquake that wiped out Ferrara, the Italian city, in 1570. And if Oxford is putting in here a reference to the 11 years after that, 1581, that is perfect for the events that are going on after the Vavasor affair and the brawls. So 1581 has been decided the original, and possibly some revision matters coming later on. We're going to the party at the Capulet house. So Romeo's going, Benvolio, his friend, is going, and now we meet a friend, Mercutio, called the most notorious scene stealer in all of Shakespeare. And you've got Romeo as the lover, the courtier, poet aspect of the Earl of Oxford. And you've got the Benvolio, just the goodwill that you want to feel and you always want to characterize yourself as, the peacemaker. And then you got Mercutio, who is considered the mercurial side of Oxford, the almost the wit that's almost on the verge of being absolutely crazy, and really poetic too. So he, Mercutio, is very anti-romantic and pretty vulgar generally, and is mocking Romeo being in a funk about Rosaline. Love, he says, pricks like a thorn. And that's a sharp little bit there, because Queen Elizabeth's motto, one of her mottos, was Rosa Sina Spina, a rose without a thorn, associated with the Tudor rose, that the red and white variegated rose that was her emblem too. But what we're saying here is, again, Romeo, Oxford, is getting nowhere with Rosaline, Elizabeth, and so it's time for a new show. And that Elizabeth is not a rose without a thorn, actually. So that's pretty daring, because Elizabeth did recognize what he was doing in these plays, but perhaps he thinks arrogantly that if he just points out that he was getting nowhere with her, that she was never committing to him or really ultimately to anybody, that of course he had an affair with one of her ladies, and as she ended up having a fit. There are some other word play, puns, family connections connected with all of this and the Earl of Oxford. But I would just say you should go to my webpage, or check it out. It's too deep a rabbit hole for today. Instead, what I'd like to do is have one of our actors give this famous Queen Mab speech, which is completely bizarre. I'm not sure what to do with it, but it does seem to have initially some maybe Elizabeth connections. It'll remind you of some of the material you get in A Midsummer Night's Dream connected to Elizabeth too. But ultimately, what's going on here? I've seen this played whimsically. I've seen this played morphed into madness. And I'm not sure I've ever read anything that really illuminates this bit. But we've got a scene.
Oh, then I see Queen Mab hath been with you. She is the fairy's midwife, and she comes in shape no bigger than an agate stone on the forefinger of an alderman, drawn with a team of little atomies athwart men's noses as they lie asleep. Her chariot is an empty hazelnut made by the joiner squirrel or old grub. Time out of the mind the fairies' coachmakers. Her wagon spokes made of long spinner's legs, the cover of the wings of grasshoppers, the traces of the smallest spider's web, the collars of the moonshine's watery beams. Her whip of cricket's bone, a lash of the film, her wagoner a small grey-coated gnat. Not so big as a round little worm, pricked from the lazy finger of a maid. And in this state she gallops night by night through lovers' brains, and then they dream of love. Or courtiers' knees that dream on curtsies straight, or a lawyer's fingers who straight dream on fees, or a lady's lips who straight on kisses dream, which oft the angry mab with blisters plagues, because their breaths with sweetmeats tainted are. Sometimes she gallops o'er a courtier's nose, and then dreams he of smelling out a suit. And sometime comes she with a tithe's pigtail, tickling a parson's nose as a lies asleep, and then he dreams of another benefice. Sometimes she driveth o'er a soldier's neck, and then he dreams he of cutting foreign throats, of breeches, ambuscados, Spanish blades, of healths 5 fathoms deep, and then anon drums in his ear, at which he starts and wakes, and being thus frighted, swears a prayer or two, and sleeps again. This is that very mab that plats the manes of horses in the night, and bakes the elf-locks in foul, sluttish hairs, which once untangled, much misfortune bodes. This is the hag, when maids lie on their backs, that presses them, and learns them first to bear, making them women of good carriage. This is she who... True. I talk of dreams, which are the children of an idle brain, begot of nothing but vain fantasy, which is as thin of substance as the air, and more inconstant than the wind, whose woo even now the frozen bosom of the north, and being angered puffs away from thence, turning his face to the dew-dropping south.
It does seem as if this isn't the only indication that Oxford felt driven almost to the point of madness by his creativity. But in any case, we go to the party, and some Oxfordians have said that old man Capulet has some characteristics of Lord Burleigh again. He would keep a record of who was coming to his house. He would be very jovial and all, and try to make himself look like a good host. And, you know, that's not proof positive, but it does match up and it does make sense. Romeo catches a glimpse of Juliet, and they meet. And so here is the meeting of Romeo and Juliet, as I called it, a sonnet at first sight. They join together in art.
If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this: my lips, 2 blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss.
Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss.
Have not saints lips and holy palmers too?
Aye, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer.
Oh, then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray. Grant thou, lest faith turn to despair.
Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake.
Then move not, while my prayer's effect I take. Thus from my lips by yours my sin is purged.
Then have my lips the sin that they have took?
sin from thy lips? O trespass sweetly urged, give me my sin again.
You kiss by the book.
Wow. You ever have that when you just immediately are witty and connected? It's pretty intense. So it may be that that's the way Oxford felt about Anne Vavasor, and that's the way she felt about him when they met at court. Something had to inspire this, and it doesn't seem like at this point it's Elizabeth anymore. Well, Juliet, for 14 or 13, on the edge of 14, is pretty savvy. She gets the nurse to find out who was that guy I was talking to, and she just pretends, who's that other one and this other one, but she gets what she wants from the nurse and then has a fit because he's from the enemies, the Montagues. My only love sprung from my only hate. Ah, I must love a loathed enemy. Well, there are some hard-hearted people who insist that this is just high drama from an adolescent girl with the cliche romantic idea that, oh no, it's my enemy's family and all this, and he's totally unable to be my boyfriend, and it's totally unfair, and my family is mean and everything. But I still think there's enough authenticity in this that you don't have to dismiss it as phony tragedy from young people. All right. Act 2. You got the chorus again at the beginning of this, and this is the last time you're going to hear from the chorus. It seems as if, as an artificial device anyway, when you get into the middle of this play, it is too real to have some artificial chorus telling you or recapping what's been going on here and all of that. When Romeo and the rest leave the party, Romeo thinks, I'm going to hang back. And the other ones wonder, whatever happened to him? And Mercutio is again being really bawdy about the whole thing, but eventually they give up. And this is when you've got the famous balcony scene. Famous because there's no balcony. So just as Hamlet railing at his mother does not take place in her bedroom, that was Laurence Olivier being influenced by Freud, so too there's no balcony in Juliet's home. But there is now. So if you go to Verona, you can go to Juliet's balcony. You won't be able to get close to it because it's so crowded with people, but you can actually see her balcony up there. And you can, I think that's where you can put your letters in about your boyfriend problems, and somebody will, Juliet, a committee of women, will answer your boyfriend problems for you in these little letters in Verona. It's absolutely charming. So meanwhile, Romeo is looking up and says, not, who's that on the balcony? He says, what light through yonder window breaks, it is the east, and Juliet is the sun. So he watches her as she gives her famous speech out there on the balcony, right? So here's Juliet.
O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name, or if thou wilt not, be but sworn, my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet. 'Tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What is a Montague? It is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be but some other name. What is in a name that which we call a rose, by any other name would smell as sweet? So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes, and without that title, Romeo, doff thy name, and for that name which is no part of thee, take all myself.
And throughout this, Romeo's making these allusions again to Queen Elizabeth, ousting Rosaline. Arise, fair son, he says to Juliet. Well, he's soliloquizing actually, and kill the envious moon, Elizabeth, who is already sick and pale with grief, that thou, her maid, art far more fair than she. Be not her maid, since she is envious. Her vestal livery is but sick and green. Well, Elizabeth's livery was white and green. So we're getting rid of this old inconstant moon. And when Romeo makes his presence known, Juliet insists too, when he's trying to swear that he loves her. Oh, swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon that monthly changes in her orb. Yeah, that's the problem with the moon. She's unconstant. And that's the problem with Elizabeth. You can't rely on her, ultimately. So we're shuffling Elizabeth off the stage and Rosaline, who we never will see. And now we're obsessed with this new dark lady, Juliet. Juliet has this notion that tosses off kind of an idea of calling Romeo's name into a cave. And this reminds Oxfordians of an echo poem that Oxford wrote when he was young, where the last words in the lines, if you echo them, will give you that E-O again, E-O. So if you echo Romeo, once again, it's going to be E-O, E-O. Basically a signature. Parting is such sweet sorrow, but they gotta. Now we join Friar Laurence, who's gathering herbs. And he seems to be a characterization of maybe Sir Thomas Smith, the guardian of the little Earl of Oxford, an enthusiastic gardener and pharmacologist for early years in his life before Lord Burleigh became the guardian of the Court of Wards. Because it's, you know, a paternal father figure who's kind, and somebody who you might remember would serve the role here. Anyway, the friar is upset that Romeo is so fickle. You know, you've been mooning about Rosaline for so long, and where were you all night? Don't tell me. And Romeo, no, 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 no. I got a new show in town here. So meanwhile, Benvolio and Mercutio wonder whatever happened to Romeo last night. He's been stabbed with a white wench's black eye, like a dark lady. And that reference comes in other plays and sonnets too. Before Romeo gets there, here comes Romeo without his roe. He's on the way. And there's a declaration from Mercutio exercising his wit, saying, oh, here's a wit of Cheverel that stretches from an inch narrow to an ell broad. What? Here's a wit of Cheverel that stretches from an inch narrow to an ell broad. Cheverel, like the fabric? What are you talking about? Well, Cheverel in the first folio is spelled Cheverell. An inch shortened would be CHE. You take off the IN. And then to an L broad, the two L's at the end. Well, if you take off the inch, the CHE, and the L, you end up with VERE. Well, what's that all about? Romeo continues the bawdy witticisms with them until the nurse arrives, saying that, you know, Juliet, who's Romeo, and can we get these kids together? And the nurse has another one of these moments that I have not quite figured out. She says, it's like she's acknowledging her illiteracy and asks, doth not Rosemary and Romeo begin both with a letter. And Romeo says, "Aye, nurse, what of that?" Both with an R. And then she says, "Ah, Mocker, that's the dog's name. R is for the, oh no, it begins with some other." So it sounds like she's saying dogs go R, but she's baffled by Rosemary and Romeo, and they both begin with a letter. What is this all about? I don't see that anybody has figured out what's that all about, but it's presented just in that way that Shakespeare does, as some kind of code to be deciphered. Juliet waits for the nurse to come back and come up with some information about Romeo. Father Laurence is still worried about Romeo's fickleness, but he thinks, well, maybe I should help out here because these violent delights have violent ends, but maybe we can get the couples together and Holy Church will incorporate two in one. And maybe these families will get over their cheap selves too. In Act 3, Benvolio tries to persuade Mercutio to get off the streets because there's going to be problems again. And Mercutio, it's easy to forget, is not a Montague or a Capulet. He's Romeo's friend, but he's actually related to the prince. So he's obligated to be neutral in these fights, but he can't help it. And he is taunted by Tybalt of the Capulet side into a fight. Romeo tries to stop it, not just Benvolio, but it goes pretty bad. And here's where we end up losing Mercutio.
I'm hurt. Plague on both your houses. I am sped. No, 'tis not so deep as a well, nor so wide as a church door. But 'tis enough. 'Twill serve. Ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man. I am peppered, I warrant, for this world. Plague on both your houses! Sounds a dog, a rat, a mouse, a cat, to scratch a man to death. A braggart, a rogue, a villain that fights by the book of arithmetic. Why the devil came you between us? I was hurt under your arm. Help me into some house, Benvolio, or I shall faint. Plague on both your houses! They have made worms meat of me. I have eaten soundly too. Your houses!
Mercutio dies not realizing what this was all about, ironically. Well, Romeo has a fit, goes after Tybalt, has a duel with him and kills him, and then laments his stained reputation. The prince finds out more of this nonsense has been going on, and Romeo has to be banished. Oxford was banished from the court after the Vavasor affair, and seems to have gone through a bit of a dark period, Shakespeare's dark period about that, and has always been, since he was young, obsessed with reputation, reputation, reputation. The nurse goes to the friar and finds Romeo throwing himself all over the floor and threatening to kill himself about all this horrible thing because banishment is worse than death. The friar tries to reason with him and say, you're just banished. You can get together, if you just wait a couple weeks, everything will be fine. But it's just too horrible. And as for the torture, Juliet is having Paris thrust on her. After the death of Tybalt, part of the family, it's touchy. We want to be in a period of mourning. So a marriage immediately, it's a good idea because it'll cheer us up, but too soon, no. It's Monday, and to have the marriage on Wednesday, nah, it's a little soon, right? So we'll do it Thursday. Juliet is not really into this. And here's another contradiction that might be part of revision. It might be part of the Burleigh parody. But because of the mourning over Tybalt, we're going to have a small ceremony. And then when it comes to it, we're going to have 20 cooks for it. So go figure. Romeo gets a rope ladder and climbs up into Juliet's balcony and into her bedroom and more. And in the morning, they do this charming aubade. It's a medieval form where you lament the coming of the morning and the sun because as lovers, you have to break up. But he gets away. And then Lady Capulet comes in and oppresses Juliet with the coming marriage. There are 3 references to specifically where this is, which completely not necessary, completely extraneous, but it's going to be at St. Peter's Church. We hear about that 3 times. Richard Rowe, again, pointed out geographically which of the St. Peter's churches this actually is in Verona, and it makes perfect sense. Well, Juliet pitches a fit and doesn't want to go along with this. Her dad becomes so outraged that he says she can die in the street like a dog. And she turns to her mother, and her mother wants nothing to do with her too. And she turns to the nurse, and the nurse says, well, Paris is kind of an okay guy, even though you're married to Romeo secretly. Juliet asks, are you serious? Speakst thou from thy heart? And the nurse says, and from my soul too, else beshrew them both. And Juliet says, amen. Like she's agreeing, but she's really cursing. I cannot believe that you, my lifelong companion and advisor, are so amoral as to go along with this and completely do not understand anything like love. So, impressive work from Juliet there. There's a reference to an evening mass by the Friar, and this is more specialized Oxfordian information that Oxford in his Italian travels would have found out, that the Pope said there's not to be evening masses, but Verona specifically kept doing it. Juliet wants to die. She tells the friar that she's done, but he has a plan, like friars do, as we saw in Much Ado About Nothing. Here's the thing. You're going to pretend to be dead. Why doesn't she just run away with Romeo? Yeah. Shut up about that. This is deep. So he's going to put her into a cataleptic trance for 2 days. Everybody will go away. And then Romeo will come. He'll send letters. And then they can be together. So she says, sure. Suddenly, Juliet is compliant with her dad's wishes. And he's pleased about this. And the marriage with Paris is going to go through. And Juliet, before she takes the poison, worries that, like, what if Friar just gave her poison to cover his role in this coming bigamy? Or what if the drug doesn't work? Or what if she awakens but ends up suffocating in the tomb? Or what if she wakes up and is completely insane from waking up in a tomb and has to go rush to one of the corpses of her dead relatives and beat her brains out with a tibia? Nevertheless, she downs the drug, and the discovery of her death is met with woe, first by the nurse and then by the parents. Meanwhile, Romeo is banished to Mantua. And the problem ends up being that there is a plague in Mantua, and the letters that the friar has sent through another person just can't reach Romeo. And this is also topical for the 1570s in Italy when Oxford was there. Romeo finds out that somebody else thinks Juliet is really dead, and so he's just done also. And here's what's really weird. He goes to an apothecary. He says he recalls seeing an apothecary and thinking at the time, if somebody needed poison, like this would be the guy to go to, like you do. Well, anyway, now it's relative, but he says, if a man did need a poison whose sale is present death in Mantua, because you're not supposed to be selling this kind of stuff, here lives a caitiff wretch, would sell it him. And this figure is also called a beggar. I think this is famously extraneous because either it's left out or in Shakespearean love, it's like a joke that we need to come up with a character for this extra guy. But what is this all about? And he's supplying death. And you get this creepy old figure, the caitiff. Famine is in thy cheeks, need and oppression starveth in thy eyes, contempt and beggary hangs upon thy back. This is a death figure, and here's one of the secret Chaucer connections. Oxford loved Chaucer, but never mentions him. He buries him like a buried poet inside his works, all over the place. This is from The Pardoner's Tale, where there's a character who is an old man wanting to die, banging with his cane on the ground, saying, "Mother, let me in," and represents death. And he brings death to these young goons, also in the story. Then, more Chaucerian stuff. I can't apologize because that's what I was supposed to be at one time. He gets the poison, Romeo does, and then he starts preaching. There is thy gold, worse poison to men's souls, doing more murder in this loathsome world than these poor compounds that thou mayst not sell. What is greed and gold and money? How is this a relevant concern or theme in this play? But it certainly does underline the Chaucerian hidden connections to it, and maybe that's for another time. So, like with Chaucer, death is personified. The friar reports to Friar Laurence that he couldn't deliver the letter because of the plague, and because Juliet's going to wake up and be alone. So here's what we're going to do. Get me a crowbar, and I'll get in there, and she can stay with me until Romeo gets another letter that's going to explain everything to him. Yeah, too late. Romeo decides he's got to visit Juliet one last time, and he addresses the tomb's entrance and says, "Thou detestable maw, thou womb of death, gorged with the dearest morsel of the earth, thus I enforce thy rotten jaws to open, and in despite I'll cram thee with more food." This is all again from Chaucer's Pardoner's Tale, where the preaching seems to be against gluttony, eating, but if you read it with the images, it's really gross. It's about sex and breeding and how disgusting the whole thing is. Well, I don't know why Oxford decided to do this here, but he did. Often left out too, and I think it's a good idea, is Paris decides to visit, and like Laertes and Hamlet fighting in the grave of Ophelia, they decide to have a battle, and Romeo kills that guy. But it's such a distraction that you wish it didn't happen, because it's messing up what we want, which is the romance of death. Romeo sees Juliet, and he's overcome by the vision, of course. And then here's his death scene.
Ah, Dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous, and that the lean abhorred monster keeps thee here in dark to be his paramour? For fear of that, I still will stay with thee, and never from this palace of dim night depart again. Here, here will I remain, with worms that are thy chambermaids. Oh, here will I set up my everlasting rest, and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars from this world-wearied flesh. Eyes, look your last. Arms, take your last embrace, and lips, oh you, the doors of breath seal with a righteous kiss, a dateless bargain to engrossing death. Come, bitter conduct, come, unsavory guide. Thou desperate pilot, now at once run on the dashing rocks, thy seasick, weary bark. Here's to my love. O true apothecary, thy drugs are quick. Thus, with a kiss I die.
Some productions have this so upsetting that he doesn't really die before Juliet gets a glimpse of him, which maybe is even more heartbreaking. But Friar Laurence comes in finally and realizes Romeo's dead and tries to whisk Juliet away. But she wakes up and oh, it's bad. Just play the thing.
What's here? A cup closed in my true love's hand. Poison, I see, hath been his timely end. Oh, churl, drunk all and left no friendly drop to help me after. I will kiss thy lips. Haply some poison yet doth hang on them. Thy lips are warm. Yea, noise? Then I'll be quick. Oh, happy dagger. This be thy sheath. There rust and let me die.
Well, everybody discovers the tragedy, and they all express their woe. Montague says, "Oh, by the way, my wife is dead." What is that? And the first quarto of this play explains why we haven't seen Benvolio for quite some time. Yeah, he's dead. The prince calls for the tomb to be shut till we can understand all of this, and Friar Laurence is the one with the most information about the story here, but not everything. And the prince blames the feuding families. All are punished. The source poem, Romeus and Juliet, has the nurse banished, the apothecary hanged, and the friar dies a couple years later. In the play, we try to have this attempted patching up of things between the two families. So they join hands and they promise to erect gold statues to the kids. But most people have decided this is hollow materialism, and have they really learned anything from it all? Has anybody except us? So this intense insistence on having a monument to the kids has been connected to Lord Burleigh's monument for his daughter Anne, which is elaborate and mentions the grandkids and omits Oxford because it's one more swipe against him and kind of bitchy. Anyway, a glooming piece at the close of the end of the play, the end of this tragedy would seem to be that nobody really gets it. The task of understanding what has transpired is left to the audience. The play, not the golden statues, is the real monument to the love and death and tragedy and triumph of two star-crossed lovers who have become for the modern world the very archetypes and words for love. Okay, now we're gonna check out, I've been looking at some of the chat and the questions too. And Hamlet is in the works for sometime in the next few months, very likely. And as for my Oxford bust, this came from Ben August, who is on the board of the Shakespeare Authorship Fellowship. And I think he sent that to Earl Showerman, who's currently the president of the Shakespeare Authorship Fellowship. And Earl loaned it to me until I get canceled. Is Mercutio modeled after one of Oxford's men killed by Anne Vavasor's uncle, Tyrrell? It could, you know, all of Oxford's characters are both somebody and him. And so I don't know about the personalities of any of his men, or I don't know if anybody does, but I can certainly see him in that character, that part of it. And also not wanting that to be the whole picture of him, of his self. But it's certainly one of those aspects because, you know, he's persistently concerned about being on the brink of madness. Lear, Hamlet, and Mercutio doesn't acknowledge it, but it can come across as pretty crazy. Okay, let me try to go back in chat that I missed. Wow, there's a lot of stuff here. Thanks. All right, there's that issue of the trees that's, in my mind, not quite resolved. Is the Y in Nivet really like an I? I don't know. Usually you get long I's with the Y's inside words like that. But as I say, I hope we're allowed to say Knivet. Queen Mab. Yeah, the Celtic aspect of Mab. She does sound like a succubus. Ooh. Let's not talk too much about Queen Elizabeth. I see a connection to the dream play also with that. We got Costa acknowledged. Bellana was a student, but not the others. And I'm not allowed to say too much about Romeo. Yeah, that balcony. It's a good gimmick. It worked. But who cares? It's good. Oh, what happens if you don't give the balcony? Well, it justifies that rope ladder, and then you have to have like really strong vines, I find, in most of these films. You're welcome for the Chaucer references. I always think, shut up, Delahoyde, about Chaucer. We're trying to talk about Shakespeare here. But it is, Chaucer has been declared the one poet, the one English poet or author that Shakespeare had anything to learn from. And he did. And I ultimately think, why isn't he mentioned? Ovid is a prop on the stage in Titus Andronicus. So, and you get Gower, a minor poet from the same Ricardian era, as a chorus in another play, but you've got the Henry IV plays where Chaucer's on the scene. He's right there. And he doesn't even get acknowledged, except he does. It's just buried. So did Oxford know instinctively or based on records that he had access to, like when he was in the tower, to suggest that governments don't like artists? And Chaucer was done away with, and that's what you can expect. Obliteration. You too, Shakespeare. Mercutio, sea-skinned. Cool idea. There's another, maybe this is too strange, but TURC in the middle of Mercutio, me, Turk, EO. That Turk was Oxford's nickname at court, at least from Queen Elizabeth. So are we playing even deeper there? Okay, people are answering questions, bringing up and the Knights who say neat. Oh, thanks for such nice comments. All right, anything else that you want me to address before I do a signing off thing here? I wrote a bit about the Chaucer, one of the Chaucer connections, but I keep finding more. And I think it was in a newsletter from the SOF maybe a couple years ago. Okay. Well, let me release you. So again, you can plunge further into this Oxfordian perspective on the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website. That's shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org, where you also find all manner of resources and links and some hilarious videos. Lots of fun. For most of my commentary today and some more, you can visit my website, michaeldelahoyde.org. You can also find further suggested reading, a slightly annotated filmography, and other information. If you're watching this on YouTube, links to more information are in the description. Also, if you are in the future, please come back and save us all. Last, not least, I want to thank our actors, Costa Chard as Mercutio, Bellana Bogar as Juliet and our songbird, and Romeo, who, like the title of the 2011 film about Oxford, is anonymous. And especially the Wizard of Ox, Jennifer Newton, for all that she puts into the behind-the-scenes work and convinces me that I have the brains, the heart, and the nerve to carry on. Thank you very much to the friends of this show, and you are warmly invited to attend next time for more illuminations. Plan is on Sunday, June 2nd, we will illuminate A Midsummer Night's Dream through the Oxfordian lens, and with Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship President Earl Showerman explaining what that other Earl is up to in this play. See you there. Peace and love.